They don't process the loss in real time. And that's the part that messes with your mind, because you're sitting there feeling everything at once: grief, confusion, relief, anger, longing, hope, all tangled in your chest while they look like they're fine. They look calm. They look distant. They look like the ending didn't even touch them. And you start doing that cruel thing we all do when we're hurting. You start measuring your value by their reaction. You start thinking, if I mattered, they'd be devastated. If I mattered, they'd fight. If I mattered, they wouldn't let this end so quietly. But listen to me. That quiet is not proof that you meant nothing. It's proof of how they survive. It's proof of how they cope. It's proof of how they bury feelings so deep that even they don't realize what's alive underneath. Avoidants often don't feel loss when loss happens, because in the moment, what they feel first is pressure leaving the room. The expectations stop. The "where are we going" stops. The vulnerability stops. The emotional responsibility stops. And to someone who has been living with closeness like it's a spotlight on every flaw, that removal can feel like relief. Not because you were heavy, not because you were too much, but because being needed scares them more than being lonely does, at least at first. So when it ends, the first emotion isn't always heartbreak. It's a strange, quiet exhale. And that exhale can make you feel invisible, like your love didn't land, like your presence didn't matter, like you were the only one carrying the weight. But what happens next is the part nobody talks about, the delayed crash. Because you were real, you were routine, you were safety, you were a mirror that reflected parts of them they didn't know how to face. And when you're gone, it doesn't always hit them with fireworks. It hits them with moments, small moments that sneak past their defenses. A song in a car when they're alone, a restaurant they pass without thinking, a phrase someone says that sounds like you, a quiet night when their phone doesn't light up the way it used to, and suddenly the silence isn't peaceful, it's empty. That's when the emotions they avoided in real time begin to rise, not as a dramatic confession, but as a weight they can't name. They replay you in fragments, not always the arguments, not always the tension, but the things that were simple and steady, the way you showed up, the way you tried to make it safe, the way you offered warmth without demanding perfection, the way you cared even when it was inconvenient. And that's the irony, isn't it? The very love they struggled to receive while you were there becomes the thing they can't stop remembering when you're gone. Because memory is safer than intimacy. Memory doesn't ask them to be brave. Memory doesn't require consistency. Memory doesn't expose them. Memory lets them feel you without risking the vulnerability of being seen in return. And you need to understand they don't process loss in real time because real time requires response. It requires emotional presence. It requires accountability. It requires saying, "I'm sorry," and meaning it. It requires saying, "I'm scared," and staying anyway. It requires admitting, "I don't know how to love properly," without turning it into an excuse. That's hard. So instead, they delay it. They store it. They compartmentalize. They tell themselves they're fine. They tell themselves they needed space. They tell themselves you were asking for too much. They tell themselves anything that keeps them from feeling the raw truth in the moment, that they lost someone who was willing to love them deeply. This is why you'll sometimes see them act strangely after it's over. They might look like they're thriving. They might post more. They might go out more. They might appear lighter, almost as if the breakup freed them. And it can break you, because you're sitting there holding the pain like a storm inside your body, while they're walking around like nothing happened. But what you're seeing is not always happiness. It's avoidance. It's distraction. It's motion so they don't have to sit still long enough to feel the grief that's waiting for them. Some people don't cry when they're supposed to cry. They cry later, when the world is quiet, when the mask slips, when there's no one to perform strength for. And the delayed processing makes you question yourself. You wonder if you were imagining the connection. You wonder if you were the only one who felt it. You wonder if you were foolish for caring so much. But your feelings are not evidence of your weakness. They're evidence of your capacity. You were present. You were honest. You were emotionally alive. You didn't run from love. You ran toward it. And if they couldn't meet you there, that doesn't make your love less real. It makes their fear louder. It makes their coping strategy stronger than their ability to stay. The truth is, the loss hits them when they can't access you anymore. Not when they choose distance, but when distance becomes permanent, when they realize your life is moving, when your replies are calmer, slower, shorter, when you stop hovering, when you stop being available for the same old cycle, when they feel the door closing, not in anger, not in revenge, but in self-respect. That's when the maybe later mentality collapses. That's when they realize you weren't a guaranteed option. You were a person who had limits, a person who can love and still leave. And sometimes that's when they reach out, not always with an apology, sometimes with something casual, something light, something that tests the water. Hey, how have you been? As if nothing happened. I saw something that reminded me of you. A like, a view, a message that gives them a way back in without the discomfort of accountability. Because if they can reopen access, they can avoid processing the loss. If they can get a response, they can tell themselves you're still there. And this is where you have to protect your heart, because their delayed processing can turn into your delayed healing if you let them keep reopening the wound. So when you're sitting there wondering, do they ever feel it? Remember this. Some people feel it late, but late doesn't mean never. Late means when the noise dies down. Late means when the distractions stop working. Late means when they finally sit alone with the consequences of what they couldn't hold. And you don't need to wait around for that moment to arrive. You don't need their delayed realization to validate what you lived through. You don't need their sadness to prove your value. You were valuable while they were distant. You were worthy while they were confused. You were enough while they were unsure. And the most powerful thing you can do is stop watching for the moment they finally feel the loss and start building a life that no longer requires their emotional timing, a life where your love is met in real time, where your presence is cherished while you're still there, where you don't have to disappear to be remembered, where you don't have to break to be taken seriously, where you don't have to beg to be held, where you don't have to earn consistency like it's a prize, where you can finally breathe without waiting for a message that decides your worth, where you can finally sleep without replaying the ending, where you can finally look in the mirror and know you didn't lose because you weren't enough. You just stopped offering your heart to someone who only knew how to feel it once it was out of reach. They replay your steadiness, and it's almost unfair how long it takes them to understand what that actually meant, because when you were right there, loving them in real time, your steadiness felt ordinary to them. It felt like something they could count on without questioning it. It felt like the background music of their life, always playing, always present, never demanding anything in return. You were the calm voice when their mind was loud. You were the patient hand when their fear got sharp. You were the one who didn't turn every problem into a punishment. You were the one who tried to talk instead of disappear. You were the one who stayed soft even when you were scared. And in the moment, they might have called that too much. They might have called it pressure. They might have called it intensity, because for an avoidant, steadiness can feel like a spotlight. It can feel like a mirror that doesn't let them hide. It can feel like love that asks them to be real. And being real is the one thing they've trained themselves to avoid. But long after it's over, when the drama is gone, when the power struggle is gone, when there's no one asking them to show up, they remember. And they don't remember you as a list of facts. They remember you as a feeling. They remember what it felt like to be cared for without having to earn it through performance. They remember what it felt like to have someone who didn't play games back. They remember the strange safety of your presence, the way you held the connection steady even when they shook it. And that's when it hits them. The thing they couldn't hold while you were there becomes the thing they can't replace once you're gone. They replay the moments you were calm. And it's not because calm is flashy, it's because calm is rare. Calm is the kind of love that doesn't threaten, doesn't punish, doesn't try to control. Calm is the kind of love that says, I'm here, without making someone feel trapped. Calm is the kind of love that makes people feel seen. And for someone who spends their life running from being fully seen, being seen is both comforting and terrifying. So in the relationship, your steadiness could have made them restless. They might have pulled away right after a good moment, right after intimacy, right after you two felt close. Because closeness reminds them of responsibility, and responsibility reminds them of all the ways they fear they'll fail. But later, when they're alone, when closeness is no longer an option, they replay those good moments and feel something they couldn't name back then: grief. They replay your steadiness, especially when life gets hard, when stress hits, when loneliness hits, when their distractions stop working, because your love wasn't just affection, it was stability, it was emotional grounding, it was the kind of care that made the world feel less sharp. And the day they lose that, they might not panic immediately, but they notice it. They notice how quiet their phone is. They notice how nobody checks on them the way you did. They notice how conversations feel shallow with people who don't have your depth. They notice how easily other connections fall apart because they're built on chemistry, not character. And then your steadiness becomes a memory they keep returning to because it represents something they don't know how to build themselves. They also replay the way you handled conflict. You didn't always do it perfectly. You're human. You had moments where you were hurt, moments where you needed reassurance, moments where you asked questions because your body could feel the distance. But even then, you tried. You tried to talk, to understand, to repair. You tried to bring clarity into confusion. You tried to make love safe. You tried to hold the relationship like it was something precious, not disposable. And long after it's over, when they look back, they realize something painful. You weren't trying to control them. You were trying to connect. You weren't being needy. You were being honest. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking for the bare minimum: consistency, effort, presence. And when they replay it, they see it clearer than they did in the moment because time removes their defenses. They replay the way you made them feel real. That's the part they don't say out loud, but it's the part that stays. You brought out a version of them that was softer, more open, more human. You made them feel like they could be loved without pretending. And that's why they sometimes pulled away, because feeling real means feeling vulnerable, and vulnerability is the place they learned not to stay. So they retreated, they shut down, they delayed replies, they created distance. They called it space, they called it being busy, they called it needing time, but underneath it was fear, fear of being depended on, fear of being seen, fear of being loved in a way that would require them to grow. And you, with your steadiness, accidentally challenged their whole coping system because you offered a love that wasn't chaotic, and chaos is what their nervous system understood. And here is the heartbreaking truth. They often appreciate your steadiness more when they meet people who don't have it. They meet someone exciting but unreliable, someone loud but inconsistent, someone affectionate but shallow. They experience the highs and then the emptiness. They experience attention that fades fast. They experience connections that crumble under stress. And in those moments, they remember you, not because you were perfect, but because you were solid, because you were the kind of person who would have stayed if they had learned how to show up. And that realization can hurt them quietly because it forces them to face the fact that they didn't lose you to another person. They lost you to their own pattern. But I need you to hear something, because your heart might still be waiting for the day they admit all of this. You might still want the message that says, "I finally understand. I'm sorry. I messed up. I miss you. You were different." And yes, maybe they think it, maybe they even feel it, but they may never say it in a way that gives you closure. That's why your healing has to be yours, not dependent on their confession. Because even if they replay your steadiness, even if they miss the way you loved, even if they regret the way they treated you, it does not change what you lived through. It does not erase the nights you cried. It does not erase the way you questioned yourself. It does not erase the inconsistency that made your heart live in survival mode. So let their mind replay you if it does. Let them remember the calm they couldn't hold. Let them miss the steadiness they took for granted. But you don't build your life around being remembered. You build your life around being respected. You build your life around being loved in real time, not appreciated in hindsight. You build your life around a connection that doesn't require you to keep proving you're safe. Because your steadiness was never meant to be a lesson for someone who refused to grow. It was meant to be the foundation of a love that meets you with the same effort, the same consistency, the same care. And if they couldn't match that, then the most powerful thing you can do is keep your steadiness, not for them, for you, so you can finally be with someone who recognizes your value while you're still there, who holds your heart like it's precious, who doesn't need to lose you to finally understand what you were. And the most powerful thing you can do is stop watching for the moment they finally feel the loss and start building a life that no longer requires their emotional timing, a life where your love is met in real time, where your presence is cherished while you're still there, where you don't have to disappear to be remembered, where you don't have to break to be taken seriously, where you don't have to beg to be held, where you don't have to earn consistency like it's a prize, where you can finally breathe without waiting for a message that decides your worth, where you can finally sleep without replaying the ending, where you can finally look in the mirror and know you didn't lose because you weren't enough. You just stopped offering your heart to someone who only knew how to feel it once it was out of reach. They remember the moments they withdrew. And this is the part you don't get to see, because it doesn't happen on your timeline, and it rarely happens with a message that makes it make sense. In the moment, when they pulled away, it felt like they were choosing peace without you. It felt like they were fine. It felt like you were the only one left holding the weight. You remember the exact seconds, the shift in tone, the delay in replies, the "I'm just busy" that somehow came with a colder energy, the way the warmth disappeared without a warning. You remember how your stomach dropped, how you tried to stay calm, how you tried to be easy, how you tried to not ask for too much, because you could feel them slipping and you were terrified that one wrong question would push them further. And what hurts most is that they made it look so effortless, like leaving you in uncertainty was nothing, like stepping back from your heart was as simple as turning off a light. But long after it's over, the memory doesn't stay effortless, because avoidants don't always escape feelings, they delay them. In real time, withdrawal feels like control. It feels like protection. It feels like escaping pressure. They convince themselves that distance is healthy, that silence is maturity, that shutting down is not making it worse. They tell themselves they're avoiding conflict when really they're avoiding closeness, they're avoiding accountability, they're avoiding the discomfort of being seen fully. And for a while, that story works because it keeps them from feeling the fear underneath. But then time passes, and the mind gets quieter, and the distractions run out, and the part of them that didn't speak when you were there begins to speak when you're gone. They remember the moment you asked a simple question, not an attack, not a demand, just a real question. Where is this going? What are we? Do you want me? Do you see a future? And they remember how they responded, not with clarity, but with withdrawal. They remember the way they made you feel like you were asking for too much, when you were only asking for the minimum that love requires, honesty. They remember how they left you standing in the doorway of your own dignity, trying to decide if you should shrink again to keep them. They remember how you tried to hold back tears, how you tried to be reasonable, how you tried to turn your pain into polite language, because you wanted to be understood, not dramatic. And later, when they replay it, the truth lands heavier. You were not the problem. Your need wasn't the problem. The problem was that your need required them to show up, and showing up scared them more than losing you did in that moment. They remember the times you were kind right after they hurt you, and that's the one that stings, because it exposes something they can't hide behind. You didn't always fight, you didn't always rage, you didn't always punish. Sometimes you just loved them through it. You gave them patience they didn't deserve. You gave them softness they didn't earn. You gave them the benefit of the doubt even when your intuition was screaming. And when they withdrew after receiving your care, when they pulled away right after intimacy, right after a good day, right after you felt close, those are the memories that return later like a quiet shame. Because there's a difference between leaving someone who hurt you and leaving someone who was trying to love you well. And even if they never admit it out loud, their mind knows the difference. They remember the look in your eyes the last time you stopped asking, because there is a specific kind of quiet that happens when someone is done. Not done with love, done with begging, done with explaining, done with hoping that basic respect will arrive if they just wait longer. It's the quiet of a person who has finally accepted a painful truth that love without consistency will always feel like starvation. And avoidants often don't notice when you're breaking in real time because they're focused on avoiding the pressure of being needed. But later they remember that moment, the moment your energy changed, the moment your voice softened in a way that wasn't tenderness anymore, it was letting go. And that memory haunts them because it's not dramatic, it's clean. And clean endings don't give them a story where you were too much. Clean endings leave them with only one explanation. You reached your limit. They remember the moments they used silence as a shield, and later they realize it was also a weapon, even if they didn't call it that. They remember how they disappeared instead of communicating, how they left you guessing, how they let you carry the anxiety alone. They remember how you tried to fix what wasn't yours to fix, how you tried to make it safe for them, how you tried to make it easy for them, and still they withdrew. And there comes a point, when you're gone, when they finally see the cost, not only to you, but to them. Because withdrawal doesn't just end relationships, it trains a person to run from intimacy until intimacy stops knocking. They remember the nights they could have chosen courage and didn't, the nights they could have called and cleared the air, the moments they could have said, "I'm scared, but I want you," and instead they said nothing. And what makes this memory so painful is that they often remember it alongside the moments you would have stayed if they had simply been real. Not perfect, real. Not flawless, present. You didn't need a fairy tale, you needed effort. You needed a consistent hand, not a disappearing act. You needed honesty, not charm. And later, they replay those crossroads, those small moments where one brave decision could have changed everything, and they feel the weight of how many times they chose safety over love. But I need you to hear the most important part, because your heart might still be waiting for their regret to arrive like a letter in the mail, neatly packaged, clearly written, finally satisfying. Their remembering is not your medicine. Their nostalgia is not your closure. Their private regret does not undo the way you had to become smaller to survive them. It does not erase the nights you stared at the ceiling asking why you weren't enough. It does not erase the way you second-guessed your needs, your feelings, your intuition, just to keep a connection alive that kept slipping through your fingers. And even if they remember every single moment they withdrew, even if they feel it deeply one day, that doesn't mean they are suddenly safe to return to, because memory is not change, regret is not repair, and missing you is not the same as choosing you. So let them remember. Let their mind replay the places where they ran. Let them sit with the truth that your love was real and their distance was a choice. But you don't live your life waiting to be understood in hindsight. You don't keep your heart on hold for someone whose courage arrives late. You take the lesson and you keep walking. You let your healing be the loudest thing they never got to silence. You let your peace become the boundary they can't negotiate. You let your future be built on someone who doesn't withdraw when love gets real, someone who doesn't need to lose you to finally recognize you, someone who holds you while you're here, not only thinks about you when it's over and you keep your softness, but you give it to the place it's finally safe. You give it to the life that chooses you back. You give it to yourself again and again until the question stops hurting, until the memories stop pulling, until your heart understands it wasn't your job to be loved properly, it was your right and you're done asking for it, you're choosing it. And the most powerful thing you can do is stop watching for the moment they finally feel the loss and start building a life that no longer requires their emotional timing, a life where your love is met in real time, where your presence is cherished while you're still there, where you don't have to disappear to be remembered, where you don't have to break to be taken seriously, where you don't have to beg to be held, where you don't have to earn consistency like it's a prize, where you can finally breathe without waiting for a message that decides your worth, where you can finally sleep without replaying the ending, where you can finally look in the mirror and know you didn't lose because you weren't enough. You just stopped offering your heart to someone who only knew how to feel it once it was out of reach.